We've all been there. Someone says something that sounds helpful on the surface, but instead of feeling seen or supported, we feel small. Suddenly, we're second guessing ourselves. That bold decision you made, now it feels foolish. That risk you took, maybe it was irresponsible. And yet, what they said was coded in politeness. Maybe they started with, I'm just worried about you, or I'm only telling you this because I care. But let's be honest, caring doesn't feel like shame. Caring feels safe. What you experienced, that was shame in disguise. Shame rarely walks in the front door. It creeps in through side comments, subtle judgments, and unsolicited advice. And when it's dressed up as concern, it becomes especially confusing. Because how do you tell someone, hey, I think what you said just made me feel really unworthy, when their words were cloaked in kindness? But here's the truth. Intention doesn't always equal impact. And emotional clarity means we need to name the impact out loud and without apology. One of the most common ways shame shows up is when someone questions your choices in a way that invalidates your growth. Maybe you left a job that was soul crushing and someone says, but that was such a stable job. Are you sure this new path is smart? What they might not realize is they're planting a seed of doubt. They're not offering insight. They're asking you to trade your integrity for their comfort. Shame disguised as concern will always ask you to abandon your path in favor of their approval. What makes this so tricky is that these moments usually come from people close to us, friends, family, mentors, people we trust, people whose words we weigh more heavily. And because we want to stay connected, we sometimes let those comments slide. We smile and nod. We explain ourselves a little too much. But over time, these interactions chip away at our self-trust. And self-trust, once eroded, takes time to rebuild. Let me be clear, real support doesn't feel like shame. It feels like someone sitting beside you, not above you. It sounds like, how can I support you in this? Not, are you sure you want to do that? Support holds space. Shame imposes fear. And we need to get better at telling the difference, because the more we confuse the two, the more we internalize the idea that we need to earn approval to be worthy. So how do we protect ourselves? First, we build awareness. Start by paying attention to how you feel after certain conversations. Do you leave feeling heavier, unsure, apologetic? That's data. That's your body waving a flag. Second, develop language to respond in the moment. You don't have to be harsh, but you can be honest. I know you mean well, but that comment didn't feel supportive. Or even, I've got this. I just need encouragement right now, not advice. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors that we choose to open for those who respect the space inside. When we stop accepting shame disguised as help, we create room for the kind of relationships that nurture rather than deplete. We invite in people who see our choices not as threats, but as brave declarations of who we're becoming. You deserve to live a life that feels aligned, not one constantly edited to keep others comfortable. So the next time someone offers you advice that makes you shrink, ask yourself, is this concern or is this control? Is this love or is this fear masked as care? Because once you start to recognize shame in disguise, you get to stop accepting it. You get to reclaim your voice, your worth, and your way forward. Conditional love. Why love with strings attached isn't love at all. Love in its truest form is a sanctuary. It's the one place where you should be able to take off the mask, let down your shoulders, and exhale fully. But sometimes what we're offered instead of love is a contract, a subtle, unspoken agreement that says, I'll love you if you behave a certain way, if you succeed, if you stay small enough to not challenge me. That's not love. That's performance. That's a transaction. And calling it love doesn't make it real. Conditional love doesn't always come with ultimatums. It often shows up quietly, dressed in expectation. It might sound like, I'm proud of you now that you finally settled down. or you're so much more likable when you don't talk about that stuff. What's being said underneath is clear. My approval is not guaranteed, it's earned. And the more you comply, the more you're rewarded with acceptance, but it's not you they're loving, it's the version of you that fits their comfort. This kind of love teaches us early how to abandon ourselves, how to become hyper aware of what pleases others, how to contort our needs and silence our instincts just to keep the connection alive. And because we're wired for connection, we comply, we twist, we hustle for our worth. But the cost is steep because over time we lose track of who we are beneath all the performing. And what's left is a life that might look good on the outside, but feels hollow inside. Sometimes the most painful realization is this: they loved me for who they needed me to be, not for who I actually am. That stings, but it's also freeing because once we name it, we can stop chasing it. We can stop bargaining for love that was never rooted in truth to begin with. We can begin to turn inward and ask, what would it look like to love myself without condition? Unconditional love doesn't mean boundaryless love. It doesn't mean accepting harm or tolerating disrespect. It means saying you don't have to earn my love by shrinking or shape-shifting. It's love that remains steady even when the other person is in a season of change, confusion, or courage. And it's the kind of love that helps someone rise, not retreat. That's the kind of love we all deserve. To move away from conditional love, we first have to see where we've accepted it, where we've mistaken control for care, where we've ignored our own voice just to keep someone else comfortable. And then we do the hard, holy work of reclaiming ourselves. That might look like setting new boundaries. It might mean saying, I'm no longer available for relationships that require me to betray myself. It might mean walking away. And yes, it's terrifying because choosing unconditional self-love might mean losing conditional external love. But let me tell you something that most people won't. The ache of loneliness is nothing compared to the pain of living unloved in a relationship. You are not selfish for choosing wholeness over approval. You are not cold for expecting love to feel safe. You are not too much for asking someone to love all of you or nothing at all. Here's the truth. Real love does not require you to fracture yourself. It does not ask for silence in exchange for peace. And it definitely doesn't expire the moment you become more than someone expected you to be. So if it comes with strings, conditions, ultimatums, or shame, it's not love, it's control. And you don't have to accept that. Not anymore. Permission to be small, the subtle ways people ask us to dim our light. There are few things more quietly painful than realizing that people around you feel more comfortable when you're playing small. They might not say it outright, they probably never will, but the signals are unmistakable. Muted excitement when you share good news, subtle deflections when you shine too brightly, or jokes that come just a little too close to your ambition. Over time, you learn the unwritten rule: it's safer to shrink, not for you, but for them. And it doesn't always come from malice. Often it comes from discomfort because your light, the way you're growing, dreaming, or daring to do something different, can trigger other people's fears, their regrets, their sense of not enough. They might not even realize they're doing it, but instead of cheering you on, they get quiet, or they change the subject, or they minimize your success by saying things like, must be nice, or don't forget where you came from. You haven't forgotten, you just refuse to stay stuck there. This is how the world gives subtle permission for you to be small, to not be too much, too ambitious, too passionate, too opinionated, too joyful, because in a culture that teaches people to compete, not connect, your rising can feel threatening, especially if others haven't yet given themselves permission to rise too. So they won't tell you not to shine. They'll just hand you a dimmer switch, and it'll come disguised as humility, loyalty, or being realistic. But here's the hard truth. Every time you shrink to keep someone else comfortable, you betray a part of yourself. Every time you water yourself down, you send a message to your inner world that you are only worthy in pieces, that your full self is too much, too bright, too alive. And if you live like that long enough, you start to internalize those limits. You stop dreaming out loud. You downplay your gifts. You start apologizing for being someone who was never meant to be small in the first place. We are taught early to seek belonging, but not taught that real belonging never requires us to split ourselves in half. True belonging says you get to be all of you here. It doesn't ask for edits. It doesn't flinch at your joy. It doesn't see your confidence as arrogance, your clarity as threat. That kind of belonging is rare, but it's real. And you will never find it by dimming your light to fit into rooms that were never built to hold your brilliance. So when you feel the pressure to shrink, pause, breathe, ask yourself, who does it serve when I make myself smaller? And if the answer is not me, then you have your answer. You are not here to play small. You are not here to tone it down. You are here to take up space in the exact way you were born to. Not because you need to prove anything, but because playing big is your birthright, not a reward you earn through self-sacrifice. It might cost you some relationships. That's the part people don't say out loud. But the ones you lose when you stop shrinking were never rooted in the real you. They were based on a version of you that dimmed your truth to keep someone else's insecurities from flaring. And once you stop doing that, you make room for the people who are not intimidated by your light, but illuminated by it. The ones who say, shine brighter, speak louder, be even more you. So here's your reminder. You do not need permission to take up space. You don't need to justify your joy, your confidence, your wild ideas. And you especially don't need to tone yourself down to be digestible. The world is full of people who will feel safer if you're small. Let them be uncomfortable. Your light is not up for negotiation. Guilt as control, when guilt is used to manipulate rather than connect. Guilt in its healthiest form is a compass. It's that small voice that says you hurt someone or you could have done better. It invites us to repair, to realign. But when guilt becomes a weapon, something wielded not to foster connection, but to maintain control, it stops being about accountability and starts being about power. That kind of guilt doesn't heal. It binds. It manipulates. And far too often, we mistake it for love. You might recognize it as the sighs, the silence, the carefully chosen words, after everything I've done for you, or I guess I just don't matter anymore. These aren't expressions of hurt. They're tools of pressure. And the goal isn't understanding, it's obedience. The person isn't really looking to be heard, they're looking to be obeyed. Guilt in this context becomes currency, and the cost is always your freedom. One of the hardest parts of navigating guilt-based control is how subtle it can be. It doesn't always come with raised voices or dramatic accusations. Sometimes it comes through soft disappointment, passive-aggressive gestures, or the kind of emotional withdrawal that leaves you scrambling to make things right, even when you've done nothing wrong. You begin to live on edge, constantly scanning for signs of someone else's dissatisfaction, and slowly, quietly, your boundaries begin to erode. And let's name it. It's often the people closest to us who do this. Parents, partners, friends, people who should be our safest places. And that's what makes it so painful. Because when love is mixed with guilt, it creates confusion. We think, maybe I do owe them. Maybe I am selfish. Maybe I should just give in. That's the trap. You're not just managing a relationship, you're managing someone else's emotional reality and losing yourself in the process. Healthy relationships are built on truth, not guilt. When someone is hurt, they can say, this is how that made me feel. That's vulnerability. That's an invitation to understand each other. But when someone says, I guess you don't care about me, or if you really loved me, you would have, that's emotional coercion. It doesn't build bridges. It builds cages. And you deserve better than a connection that demands your compliance at the cost of your clarity. To break free from guilt-based control, you have to stop confusing peace with silence. Just because things are calm after you give in doesn't mean they're healthy. Start paying attention to how often you compromise just to avoid someone else's disappointment. Ask yourself, am I doing this from love or from fear of being seen as ungrateful, difficult, or selfish? That question alone can shift everything. Healing from this kind of pattern often involves grief. Grief for the years spent people pleasing. Grief for the authentic self that got buried beneath performance. And sometimes grief for the relationships you may have to loosen or even let go because they were built on your self-sacrifice. But beyond that grief is something powerful, sovereignty. And that is where your peace lives. You are not selfish for having limits. You are not cruel for choosing boundaries over guilt. And you are not unloving for refusing to carry the emotional weight of others at the expense of yourself. Guilt should never be the reason you say yes. And love should never come with a leash. You don't owe anyone your peace. You owe it to yourself to protect it. Advice is one of the most complicated forms of communication we navigate because on the surface, it sounds helpful. It often comes from people we care about, people who care about us. But the hard part, not all advice is created equal. Some advice is rooted in wisdom and lived experience. It's expansive, empowering, and clear. But a lot of what we call advice is really just fear in disguise. It's not about your growth. It's about someone else's comfort. Fear-maxed advice usually sounds cautious, logical, and deeply reasonable. But there's a tell. It makes you feel smaller, not stronger. It's often laced with phrases like, just be careful, or you don't want to risk too much, or I just don't want to see you get hurt. On the surface, it seems like concern, but underneath, it's often fear. Their fear, not yours. And when we absorb that kind of guidance without examining it, we start making decisions based not on what we want, but on what someone else is afraid of. The people who love us often mean well, but meaning well and giving helpful advice are not the same thing. Their fear might come from their own history, their regrets, their wounds, their missed chances. Maybe they stayed in a job they hated, so they can't understand why you'd leave yours. Maybe they never chased a dream, so yours feels threatening. They are not trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect you. But protection isn't always what we need. Sometimes what we need is permission to leap. Fear-based advice often tries to keep us safe from failure, but truth-rooted support prepares us to walk through it. It doesn't say, don't do it. It says, if you do it and things get hard, I'm here. Truth-rooted support doesn't shrink your dreams to fit someone else's comfort zone. It holds space for your uncertainty and your desire. It says, yes, it's risky, and yes, it's yours to try. That kind of support isn't afraid of your expansion. It's not interested in taming your fire. It wants to see you burn bright. Learning to tell the difference between fear and wisdom means getting really honest about how advice makes you feel. After you hear someone's opinion, do you feel energized or deflated? Do you feel seen or subtly shamed? Do you feel clearer or suddenly filled with doubt? These are not small questions. They are the difference between being led and being limited, between living your life or living someone else's fears. This doesn't mean you stop listening to people entirely. It means you build a filter, one that asks, is this coming from love or fear? Experience or avoidance? Support or subtle control? Wisdom leaves room for your voice. Fear tries to replace it. When someone gives you advice, they should be offering you options, not outcomes. Suggestions, not ultimatums. Support, not steering. And here's something essential. Trusting yourself doesn't mean you never need input. It means you learn how to weigh it. You learn how to sit with someone's concern without absorbing it. You learn how to say thank you and still do what's right for you because nobody else has to live your life. Nobody else will feel the ache of a dream you silenced. Nobody else can know what stirs your soul like you do. At the end of the day, the question isn't what should I do? The question is what's mine to do, even if it scares me. Because the best advice doesn't shield you from fear. It reminds you that fear doesn't get to drive. The best advice hands you a mirror, not a map, and it tells you, you already know the way, go.